Before Harry Potter ever stepped into the wizarding world, there were already ideas and questions that didn't quite have clear answers. Some were hidden in small details, while others were quietly left behind as the story moved forward. When you take a closer look, certain patterns begin to stand out. Decisions feel more deliberate, events seem more connected, and a few mysteries start to feel less accidental. Tonight, we're going to explore some of the most disturbing theories that still fit within the canon. Not as speculation, but as possibilities that begin to make sense the more carefully you examine them. There is a version of events where everything that happened to Harry Potter was not simply the result of circumstance, but part of a much longer and more deliberate plan. When you begin to look closely at Albus Dumbledore's actions across the series, a pattern starts to emerge. It is not a pattern of chaos or reaction, but one of careful positioning, quiet observation, and long-term decision-making that often places others exactly where they need to be, whether they understand it or not. From the very beginning, Dumbledore makes a choice that defines Harry's entire childhood. Instead of placing him within the wizarding world, surrounded by people who understood him, he leaves him with the Dursleys. On the surface, this decision is explained as protection. The blood magic created by Lily's sacrifice would keep Harry safe as long as he could call that place home. But at the same time, this decision ensures that Harry grows up isolated, unaware of his identity, and completely removed from the influence of fame or power. He enters the wizarding world not as a confident prodigy, but as someone who is humble, uncertain, and willing to trust guidance. It is a situation that benefits Dumbledore's ability to shape his development. As Harry's journey continues, Dumbledore rarely intervenes directly, even in moments where he clearly has the power to do so. Instead, he allows events to unfold in ways that push Harry towards certain experiences. In his first year, the protections surrounding the Philosopher's Stone are not just barriers to keep others out. They are challenges, each one aligned with the specific abilities of Harry, Ron, and Hermione. Logic, bravery, and magical skill are all required, and each obstacle seems designed to test them in a controlled way. It raises the question of whether these protections were only meant to guard the stone, or if they also served as a way to guide Harry through his first real confrontation with danger. This pattern continues in subtle ways. Information is often given to Harry at exactly the moment he needs it, but rarely before. Dumbledore withholds key details, even when sharing them earlier could have made things safer. The existence of Horcruxes, for example, is not fully explained until much later, despite Dumbledore having known about them for years. Instead, Harry is gradually introduced to the idea, piece by piece, as if being prepared for something that Dumbledore has already anticipated. At the same time, Dumbledore places a great deal of trust in Harry's ability to make decisions, but this trust exists within a framework that Dumbledore himself has constructed. Harry is given freedom, but that freedom operates within carefully arranged circumstances. He is allowed to discover, to struggle, and to act. But the path he walks is often one that has already been influenced long before he realizes it. Even Dumbledore's relationships with others reflect this approach. Snape, for instance, is positioned as both protector and observer, someone who can influence events from within Voldemort's circle, while also guiding Harry from a distance. The Order of the Phoenix operates in a similar way, with members placed strategically, each contributing to a larger effort that only Dumbledore fully understands. It is not a chaotic resistance, but a network shaped by a single guiding mind. Perhaps the clearest example of this long-term planning comes near the end, when it is revealed that Dumbledore knew Harry carried a fragment of Voldemort's soul. This knowledge reframes many of his earlier decisions, allowing Harry to face danger, encouraging his growth, and even keeping certain truths hidden begin to feel less like isolated choices and more like steps toward a specific outcome. Dumbledore does not simply react to Voldemort's actions. He prepares for them years in advance. What makes this theory unsettling is not that Dumbledore was acting with malicious intent, but that he was willing to guide events in a way that placed enormous responsibility on a child. He believed in the importance of choice, yet he shaped the circumstances in which those choices would be made. He valued love and sacrifice, yet he allowed Harry to walk a path that would eventually require both. When viewed this way, Dumbledore's role shifts from a wise mentor to something more complex. He becomes a strategist, someone who understands that defeating Voldemort requires more than power. It requires positioning, timing, and a deep understanding of human nature. And in that process, he quietly ensures that every piece is in place, long before the final move is made. There is a point in the story where the direction of everything becomes clear, but only in hindsight. It is the moment when Harry walks into the forest, fully aware that he is about to die. What makes this moment unsettling is not just the sacrifice itself, but the possibility that it was always meant to happen. When you trace the events leading up to it, a pattern begins to form that suggests Harry was not simply guided toward victory, but toward a necessary end. The prophecy is often seen as the starting point. It speaks of a child with the power to defeat Voldemort, born at the end of July, marked as his equal. At first glance, it appears to describe a destined hero, but the prophecy does not actually say that Harry will survive. It only states that one must die at the hand of the other. This leaves open the possibility that Harry's role was never about living through the conflict, but about fulfilling a condition that would make Voldemort vulnerable. Dumbledore's understanding of Horcruxes plays a crucial role here. Long before Harry is aware of what he carries, Dumbledore has already begun investigating Voldemort's methods of immortality. By the time Harry reaches his later years at Hogwarts, Dumbledore knows that a fragment of Voldemort's soul resides within him. This realization changes everything. It means that Harry himself is not just the one destined to defeat Voldemort, but also one of the things that must be destroyed in order to make that defeat possible. Despite this knowledge, Dumbledore does not tell Harry immediately. Instead, he continues to guide him forward, allowing him to grow, to form bonds, and to develop the very qualities that will ultimately lead him to make a choice. It is not a forced sacrifice, but it is one that Dumbledore knows will eventually occur. By withholding the truth, he ensures that when Harry does learn it, the decision will come from his own understanding rather than from obligation alone. The way Dumbledore prepares for this moment is subtle. He leaves Harry the resurrection stone, hidden within the snitch, ensuring that when the time comes, Harry will not have to face death entirely alone. This is not an action taken in uncertainty. It is a deliberate step, placed years in advance, anticipating that Harry will walk into that forest. The existence of this gift suggests that Dumbledore had already accepted the outcome long before Harry ever did. What makes this theory particularly disturbing is that Harry's entire journey can be seen as preparation for that final act. Every challenge he faces, every lesson he learns, builds toward a point where he is capable of choosing to sacrifice himself. His loyalty, his empathy, and his willingness to protect others are not just traits that help him survive. They are the very things that make him willing to die. At the same time, Dumbledore's actions show a careful balance between control and trust. He does not force Harry down this path, but he creates the conditions in which Harry will arrive at it on his own. He allows Harry to believe that there is always another way, while quietly understanding that there may not be. This approach ensures that Harry's final decision carries weight, not as something imposed, but as something chosen. The scene in the forest reinforces this idea. Harry does not go there in confusion. He goes with clarity, having pieced together the truth. He understands that the part of Voldemort within him must be destroyed, and he accepts that this means his own death. There is no resistance, no attempt to escape. Instead, there is a quiet acceptance that feels less like a sudden realization and more like the final step in a path that has been unfolding for years. When Harry reaches the space that resembles King's Cross, the conversation with Dumbledore offers a different perspective. Dumbledore does not deny that he knew what would happen. Instead, he acknowledges it in a way that suggests he always understood the necessity of Harry's sacrifice. At the same time, he leaves room for Harry's survival, explaining that Voldemort's actions have given Harry a choice. This moment blurs the line between destiny and possibility, raising the question of whether Dumbledore planned for Harry to live or simply hoped that he might. Seen from this angle, Harry's survival is not the expected outcome, but a consequence of factors that even Dumbledore could not fully control. The protection in Harry's blood, the connection between their wands, and Voldemort's own decisions all contribute to an ending that goes beyond what was originally required. But the path leading there still depends on Harry being willing to die. This interpretation changes the nature of Dumbledore's role. He is no longer just guiding Harry toward victory, but toward a point where sacrifice becomes unavoidable. He understands that Voldemort cannot be defeated while any part of his soul remains, and he recognizes that one of those fragments lives within Harry himself. In that sense, Harry is both the solution and the final obstacle. What makes this theory resonate is how closely it aligns with the themes of the story. Love, sacrifice, and choice are all central elements, and Harry's willingness to give his life embodies each of them. But when viewed through this lens, those themes take on a more complex meaning. They are not just the qualities that define a hero, they are also the qualities that make that hero capable of fulfilling a role that was set long before he fully understood it. In the end, Harry does return. He is given the chance to continue, to finish what he started, and to live beyond the moment that seemed inevitable. But the fact remains that he was ready to die, and that this readiness was shaped over time. Whether by design or by necessity, his journey leads him to a place where sacrifice is not only possible, but expected. There is a common belief within the wizarding world that the Sorting Hat simply looks at a student's traits and places them into the house that best matches who they are. Bravery leads to Gryffindor, intelligence to Ravenclaw, loyalty to Hufflepuff, and ambition to Slytherin. At first glance, this system appears straightforward, almost mechanical. But when you begin to look more closely at the way the Sorting Hat actually behaves, it becomes clear that the process may be far less rigid than it seems. The first indication comes from the Hat's ability to listen. When Harry sits beneath it, the Hat does not immediately declare his house based on observation alone. Instead, it speaks with him, considers his thoughts, and most importantly, responds to his preference. Harry does not want to be placed in Slytherin, and the Hat ultimately respects that choice. This suggests that sorting is not simply about identifying traits, but about weighing them against the student's own intentions. This idea raises an important question. If a student can influence the outcome, then the system is not purely objective. It becomes something more flexible, shaped not just by who a person is, but by who they want to be. In Harry's case, the Hat acknowledges that he possesses qualities associated with Slytherin. Ambition, resourcefulness, and a certain willingness to bend rules are all present. Yet these traits do not define his placement. His decision to reject Slytherin carries enough weight to redirect the outcome entirely. Looking beyond Harry, this pattern appears in other students as well. Hermione, for example, shows a clear alignment with Ravenclaw through her intelligence and love of learning. Yet she is placed in Gryffindor, where bravery and action are valued more highly. This suggests that the Hat does not simply categorize based on dominant traits. It may instead consider potential, or perhaps the qualities that a student is most likely to grow into. The existence of Slytherin itself adds another layer to this theory. Over time, the house develops a strong association with dark wizards and pure-blood ideology. This reputation becomes so deeply ingrained that it begins to influence perception. Students who are sorted into Slytherin are often viewed with suspicion before they have had the chance to define themselves. If the Hat is aware of this stigma, then placing a student in Slytherin is not just a reflection of their traits. It is also a decision that will shape how they are treated by others. This creates the possibility that the Sorting Hat is not entirely neutral. It was created by the founders of Hogwarts, each of whom had their own beliefs about what qualities mattered most. Salazar Slytherin, in particular, valued blood, purity, and exclusivity. If any of these biases remain embedded within the hat, then its decisions may carry echoes of those original preferences. Even if it strives to be fair, it may still operate within a framework established centuries earlier. At the same time, the hat itself acknowledges that sorting is not perfect. It expresses concern about placing students too early, suggesting that people change over time. This admission implies that the system is based on an incomplete understanding of a person's future. A child at 11 years old is still developing, still discovering who they are. Sorting them at that stage means assigning them to a path before that process is complete. This idea becomes more significant when you consider how strongly house identity influences behavior. Students tend to adopt the values associated with their house, reinforcing the traits that led to their placement. A Gryffindor may feel pressure to act bravely, while a Slytherin may lean further into ambition. Over time, this can create a feedback loop, where the initial sorting decision shapes the very traits it was meant to identify. In this sense, the sorting hat may function less as a mirror and more as a guide. It does not simply reveal who a student is, but directs them toward a particular environment where certain qualities will be encouraged. This makes the process both powerful and potentially limiting. A student placed in one house may develop differently than they would have in another, not because of who they are, but because of where they were placed. The case of Peter Pettigrew offers an interesting example. Sorted into Gryffindor, he is expected to embody courage and loyalty. Yet his actions later in life show fear and self-preservation instead. This raises the possibility that the hat saw potential in him that was never fully realized, or that his placement did not align with his true nature as strongly as intended. Either way, it suggests that sorting is not an infallible process. When viewed as a whole, the system begins to feel less like a fixed classification and more like a conversation between identity and choice. The hat listens, interprets, and decides, but it does so in a way that allows for influence from the student. It recognizes traits, but it also considers desires, fears, and possibilities. This makes the outcome more complex than a simple assignment. What makes this theory unsettling is the implication that the sorting hat plays an active role in shaping the future of every student at Hogwarts. By placing them into a specific house, it determines their social group, their expectations, and the environment in which they will grow. It does not just sort them, it sets them on a path. And if that is the case, then the question is not just whether the hat chooses correctly, but whether it should be making that choice at all. There are moments within Hogwarts that feel less like the behavior of a building and more like the actions of something aware. Doors appear when they are needed, passages open and close without warning, and entire rooms seem to respond to the thoughts of those inside. At first, these details can be dismissed as examples of powerful magic layered over centuries. But when you begin to consider how consistently the castle reacts to the people within it, the idea emerges that Hogwarts may be more than just a place. It may be something that listens, adapts, and in its own way, understands. One of the clearest examples of this is the Room of Requirement. It does not simply exist as a hidden space waiting to be discovered. It appears only when someone has a genuine need, and it reshapes itself to meet that need exactly. Whether it is a place to hide, to practice, or to find something long forgotten, the room provides what is required without being told explicitly. This behavior suggests more than a fixed enchantment. It suggests a system capable of interpreting intention, translating thought into form, and responding with precision. The castle itself also shows signs of movement that go beyond simple design. Staircases shift, not randomly, but in ways that guide or delay students. Corridors change, sometimes leading to unexpected destinations. These features are often described as quirks, but they follow a pattern of interaction. Students learn to navigate them over time, almost as if the castle is testing their awareness, encouraging adaptation rather than offering stability. Even the hidden spaces within Hogwarts seem to exist with purpose. The Chamber of Secrets, for instance, is not just concealed, it remains inaccessible to anyone except the heir of Slytherin, responding only to a specific language and lineage. This level of restriction suggests that the castle is capable of recognizing more than physical presence. It can differentiate between individuals, responding to qualities that are not immediately visible. At the same time, Hogwarts appears to protect its inhabitants in subtle ways. During moments of danger, certain paths become available while others close off. Teachers are alerted, sometimes without clear explanation, to disturbances within the school. Magical protections activate when threats approach, shielding the castle from external harm. While many of these defenses are attributed to spells placed by its founders and later headmasters, the coordination of these responses gives the impression of something more cohesive, as if the castle itself plays a role in maintaining balance. The presence of ghosts adds another layer to this idea. These are not simply remnants of the past. They interact with the environment, move freely through the castle, and retain awareness of events as they unfold. Their existence within Hogwarts feels integrated rather than incidental, as though the castle accommodates them as part of its ongoing life. This creates an atmosphere where the boundaries between structure and presence begin to blur. There are also moments when Hogwarts seems to respond to emotional states. Students in distress often find places to hide or gather without fully understanding how they arrived there. The castle becomes a space that reflects their needs, offering comfort or challenge depending on the situation. This responsiveness is difficult to explain through static enchantments alone. It suggests a dynamic system, one that evolves alongside the people who inhabit it. If the castle does possess a form of awareness, it is not one that operates like human consciousness. It does not speak, and it does not act with clear intention in the way a person would. Instead, its behavior resembles a kind of instinct, shaped by the magic embedded within its walls. Over centuries, layers of spells, memories, and interactions may have combined to create something that functions almost like a living entity, even if it was never designed to be one. The founders of Hogwarts were among the most powerful witches and wizards of their time. In creating the school, they infused it with complex magic, each contributing their own vision and abilities. It is possible that in doing so, they created not just a place of learning, but a structure capable of sustaining and adapting itself over time. The Sorting Hat, which contains fragments of their personalities, already demonstrates that magic can preserve aspects of consciousness. Extending this idea to the castle itself does not seem as unlikely when viewed in that context. What makes this theory unsettling is the implication that Hogwarts is not entirely passive. It is not just a setting where events occur, but an active participant in those events. It shapes movement, reveals and conceals information, and responds to the people within it in ways that influence outcomes. Students believe they are navigating the castle, but it may be just as accurate to say that the castle is guiding them in return. Over time, this creates a relationship between the inhabitants and the structure that goes beyond simple familiarity. The castle becomes something that is experienced rather than understood, a presence that is always there, quietly shaping the environment in ways that are rarely questioned. And if Hogwarts is capable of this level of interaction, then it raises a deeper question about the nature of magic itself. Not as something that is merely used, but as something that can accumulate, evolve, and perhaps even become aware in ways that are not immediately visible. There is a detail about memory within the wizarding world that often goes unnoticed, not because it is hidden, but because it is accepted too easily. Memories can be extracted, stored, and revisited with clarity that goes beyond ordinary recollection. They can be viewed from different angles, examined in detail, and shared with others as if they were still happening. At first, this seems like a useful tool, a way to preserve truth. But when you begin to consider how these memories are created and handled, the possibility emerges that they are not as reliable as they appear. The pensieve presents memories as complete experiences, When someone enters one, they are not limited to the perspective of the person who originally lived it. They can move around freely, observe details that may not have been consciously noticed, and even focus on elements that were outside the original field of vision. This raises an important question about how these memories are constructed. If they contain more information than the person could have perceived at the time, then they are not simple recordings. They are reconstructions. This idea becomes more significant when you consider who controls these memories. The person who extracts them decides which memories to share and in what context they are presented. While the pensieve itself may not alter what it is given, the selection process introduces a layer of influence. A memory shown in isolation can suggest one meaning, while the same memory placed alongside others may lead to a different interpretation. In this way, the truth that emerges from a pensieve is shaped not just by the memory itself, but by the way it is framed. There is also the question of accuracy. Human memory is not perfect. It is influenced by emotion, perspective, and time. Details can be forgotten, altered, or emphasized, depending on how the event is remembered. When a memory is extracted, it carries these imperfections with it. Even if the pensieve presents it with clarity, it does not guarantee that what is being shown is an objective reality. It may instead be a refined version of a subjective experience. This becomes particularly important in the case of Severus Snape. The memories he leaves behind are central to understanding his actions and motivations. They reveal his past, his loyalty, and the choices that define his role in the story. But these memories are also carefully selected. They guide the viewer toward a specific conclusion, one that reframes Snape's character in a new light. While there is no clear evidence that these memories have been altered, the possibility remains that what is shown is only part of a larger picture. The existence of memory charms further complicates this idea. Wizards are capable of modifying or erasing memories, changing a person's understanding of events entirely. If memories can be altered within a mind, it raises the question of whether those changes carry over when the memory is extracted. A memory that has been modified may still appear complete and convincing within a pensieve, even if it no longer reflects what actually happened. At the same time, the wizarding world treats memories as a form of evidence. They are used to uncover truths, to confirm suspicions, and to reveal hidden details. This trust suggests a belief that memories, when properly handled, can be relied upon. But if there is even a small possibility that they can be incomplete or influenced, then that trust becomes uncertain. What is presented as truth may instead be a version of events shaped by perspective and intention. The ability to revisit memories also changes the way they are experienced. A moment that once existed in the past can be examined repeatedly, each time revealing new details. This creates a sense of permanence that does not exist in ordinary memory, but it also distances the experience from its original context. The emotions, the uncertainty, and the limitations of perception are replaced by a clearer, more controlled view. What remains is not the event as it was lived, but as it can now be observed. This shift has implications for how characters understand their own past. When memories can be externalized and analyzed, they become something separate from the person who experienced them. This separation allows for reflection, but it also introduces the possibility of reinterpretation. A memory that once felt certain may begin to appear different when viewed from another angle, leading to new conclusions that were not apparent before. What makes this theory unsettling is the idea that memory, something often associated with truth, may not be as stable as it seems. The pensieve offers clarity, but that clarity may come at the cost of context. It presents events in a way that feels complete, even when they may not be. This creates a subtle uncertainty, where what is seen cannot be fully separated from how it has been shaped. In the end, the use of memories within the wizarding world reflects a deeper question about the nature of truth itself, not as something fixed and unchanging, but as something influenced by perception, selection, and interpretation. The pensieve allows people to look into the past, but it does not guarantee that what they find there is exactly as it was. There is a quiet assumption that runs through the wizarding world, one that is rarely questioned because it feels natural within the structure of the story. It is the idea that magic itself is neutral, shaped entirely by the intentions of those who use it. Spells can heal or harm, protect or destroy, depending on the caster, but when you begin to examine certain patterns more closely, the possibility emerges that magic may not be completely passive. It may have tendencies, preferences, or even consequences that extend beyond simple intention. One of the clearest examples of this can be seen in the use of dark magic. Unlike other forms of spellwork, dark magic is often described as having a lasting effect on the user. It is not just the outcome of the spell that matters, but the act of casting it. Wizards who rely on it frequently begin to change over time, becoming more detached, more focused on control, and less restrained by moral limits. This shift suggests that the magic itself may influence the person using it, rather than simply responding to their will. Horcruxes take this idea even further. The creation of a Horcrux requires not only a specific spell, but an act that tears the soul apart. Once created, the Horcrux does not remain a passive object. It exerts influence on those around it, affecting thoughts, emotions, and behavior. The diary, the locket, and the ring all demonstrate this ability in different ways, creating a presence that feels active rather than inert. This raises the question of whether magic tied to the soul carries a kind of awareness, even if it is limited or indirect. At the same time, protective magic seems to operate differently. The protection created by Lily Potter's sacrifice is not something that can be easily replicated through spellwork alone. It is tied to intent, but also to a deeper connection that extends beyond a single moment. This form of magic persists over time, continuing to shield Harry in ways that go beyond what a standard spell would achieve. It behaves less like a tool and more like a lasting force, shaped by the conditions under which it was created. The behavior of wands adds another layer to this pattern. Wands are described as choosing their wizard, forming a bond that affects how magic is performed. This relationship is not purely mechanical. It involves compatibility, recognition, and even loyalty. The concept of wand allegiance, where ownership can shift based on actions rather than possession, suggests that magic itself responds to events in ways that resemble judgment or preference. Even within spellcasting, there are indications that intention alone is not always enough. Certain spells require more than knowledge of the incantation. They demand a specific state of mind or emotional alignment. The Patronus charm, for example, depends on the caster's ability to focus on a powerful, positive memory. Without that emotional foundation, the spell cannot be produced effectively. This requirement implies that magic interacts with internal states in a way that goes beyond simple instruction. There are also moments where magic appears to act independently. Objects enchanted long ago continue to function without direct input, adapting to new situations as they arise. The Marauder's map reveals information in real time, tracking movement and responding to commands. The Sorting Hat evaluates students based on thought and potential. These examples suggest that magic, once set in motion, can sustain processes that resemble awareness, even if they do not fully match human understanding. If magic does possess these qualities, then it may not be entirely neutral. It may respond differently depending on how it is used, reinforcing certain behaviors while discouraging others. Dark magic may become easier to use over time, while protective magic may require greater effort but produce more stable results. This creates a subtle influence on those who practice it, guiding them in ways that are not always visible. What makes this theory particularly unsettling is the implication that magic shapes the wizard as much as the wizard shapes the magic. Each spell cast, each choice made, contributes to a pattern that can deepen over time. A wizard who frequently uses harmful magic may find it becoming more natural, while one who focuses on protection and healing may strengthen those abilities instead. This creates a feedback loop where actions reinforce tendencies, gradually altering the path a person follows. In this sense, magic is not just a tool, but a system of interaction. It responds, adapts, and carries consequences that extend beyond immediate results. It does not force decisions, but it may influence the ease with which certain decisions are made. Over time, this influence can become significant, shaping not only what a wizard can do, but who they become. The idea that magic itself may have these underlying tendencies changes the way the wizarding world is understood. It suggests that power is not entirely under control, and that every use of magic carries a trace of something larger, not a will in the human sense, but a presence that reacts, accumulates, and subtly guides the direction of those who rely on it. There is a pattern in the way time is handled within the wizarding world that seems controlled at first, but becomes increasingly unstable the more closely it is examined. Time travel exists, but only in a limited and highly regulated form. It is presented as something delicate, something that must be handled carefully to avoid unintended consequences. Yet despite these warnings, there are moments where time appears to bend in ways that suggest the rules are not as firm as they seem. The use of the time turner introduces this idea in a controlled environment. Hermione is able to attend multiple classes by moving backward through time, carefully repeating hours that have already passed. The process is described as safe when used correctly, with strict instructions to avoid interaction with one's past self. This creates the impression that time is a fixed structure, one that can be revisited without being altered, as long as certain boundaries are respected. However, the events surrounding Sirius Black and Buckbeak challenge this understanding. Harry and Hermione travel back and actively influence events that had already occurred. They do not create a new timeline. Instead, their actions were always part of the sequence. What seemed like coincidence earlier is revealed to be the result of their future involvement. This suggests that time within the wizarding world may operate as a closed loop, where past, present, and future are already intertwined. If this is the case, then the idea of choice becomes more complex. When Harry casts the Patronus to save himself and Sirius, he initially believes it was his father. Later, he realizes it was himself, acting from a different point in time. This moment implies that his future actions were always part of his past. It raises the possibility that certain events are not just influenced by time travel, but dependent on it. The destruction of the time turners at the Ministry adds another layer to this theory. Officially, it is presented as a necessary loss, removing a dangerous form of magic from circulation, but it also eliminates the ability to explore time in the same way again. This could be seen as an attempt to prevent further complications, or as a recognition that time manipulation had already created situations that were difficult to control. There are also hints that time itself may resist interference. Wizards who attempt to alter events beyond certain limits risk creating instability. Stories within the Department of Mysteries suggest that time can behave unpredictably when pushed too far, leading to outcomes that cannot be easily reversed. This gives the impression that time is not just a passive dimension, but something that maintains its own consistency. At the same time, prophecies introduce a different perspective. They describe events before they happen, yet their fulfillment often depends on the actions of those who hear them. This creates a connection between knowledge of the future and the choices made in the present. It suggests that time is not entirely fixed, but shaped by awareness in ways that are difficult to measure. The combination of these elements creates a system where time appears both stable and flexible. Certain events seem predetermined, while others remain open to influence. The boundaries between these states are not clearly defined, making it difficult to determine where control ends and inevitability begins. Wizards are told to be cautious, but the rules they follow may only represent part of a larger structure. What makes this theory unsettling is the possibility that time within the wizarding world is not something that can be fully understood or controlled. It allows for movement, but within limits that are not always visible. Actions taken in one moment can echo backward or forward, creating connections that are only revealed later. This creates a sense of continuity that goes beyond simple cause and effect. In this context, time travel is not just a tool, but a glimpse into a system that operates on its own principles. It shows that events can be linked in ways that challenge the idea of a linear sequence. What happens may not simply follow from what came before, but may also depend on what is yet to occur. The experience of Harry and Hermione suggests that while individuals can move within time, they may not be able to change its overall structure. Their actions fulfill what has already happened, rather than creating something new. This creates a loop where cause and effect exist together, each depending on the other. In the end, the presence of time travel raises more questions than it answers. It reveals that the flow of time in the wizarding world is not as straightforward as it appears. It can be revisited, influenced, and experienced from multiple perspectives. But it may also be guided by patterns that cannot be easily altered. This leaves open the possibility that what seems like choice is sometimes part of something already set in motion. There is a quiet detail woven through the story that rarely draws attention on its own, yet becomes difficult to ignore once it is noticed. It is the way certain names carry weight beyond simple identification. Names are spoken carefully, avoided entirely, or remembered long after the person is gone. In some cases, they seem to hold a kind of presence, as if the act of naming connects more than just sound to meaning. The most direct example of this is the name of Voldemort. For much of the story, it is treated as something dangerous to say. People avoid it, choosing instead to refer to him indirectly. This fear is not only cultural, it eventually becomes literal when the name is turned into a taboo, allowing those who speak it to be tracked. What began as a social habit becomes an enforced rule, where language itself becomes a tool of control. This shift suggests that names are not entirely passive within the wizarding world. The taboo works by attaching magic to a specific word, linking it to detection and consequence. This means that a name, once altered in this way, can act as a signal, carrying information beyond its immediate use. It becomes more than a label. It becomes a point of connection between people and places. Even before the taboo, the avoidance of Voldemort's name reflects a deeper pattern. Fear shapes language, and language in turn reinforces fear. By refusing to say his name, people contribute to the sense that he is something beyond ordinary understanding. The name itself begins to feel powerful, not because of what it is, but because of how it is treated. This creates a feedback loop where belief and behavior strengthen each other over time. The concept of naming extends beyond Voldemort. True names are often associated with deeper forms of magic in other contexts, and while this is not always explicitly stated within the story, there are hints that knowing or using a name correctly carries significance. Tom Riddle's transformation into Voldemort is not just a change of identity, but a deliberate reconstruction of how he is perceived. By creating a new name, he reshapes the way others relate to him, distancing himself from his past. This act of renaming also suggests control. By choosing his own name, he defines himself on his own terms, rejecting the one given to him at birth. This creates a separation between who he was and who he becomes. It allows him to build a new identity that aligns with his ambitions, while leaving behind anything that might connect him to vulnerability or limitation. There are also moments where names seem to carry recognition. The Marauder's map, for example, identifies individuals by name, revealing their location within Hogwarts. This indicates that names are linked to identity in a way that magic can detect and interpret. The map does not rely on appearance or physical description. It uses names as the primary marker of who someone is. This connection between name and identity suggests that names function as anchors, within magical systems. They allow spells and objects to identify individuals consistently, regardless of changes in form or disguise. Polyjuice Potion can alter appearance, but it does not change the underlying identity that certain magic responds to. This reinforces the idea that a name is tied to something more stable than outward appearance. The way names are remembered also plays a role. Certain names persist, carrying influence even after the person is gone. Historical figures, powerful wizards, and significant events are all tied to names that continue to shape how they are understood. This persistence gives names a kind of continuity, allowing them to exist beyond the lifespan of the individual. What makes this theory unsettling is the possibility that names are not just reflections of identity, but active components of it. They can be used to track, to influence, and to define. They can carry fear, authority, or recognition, depending on how they are treated. In some cases, they may even serve as points of access within magical systems, linking individuals to spells or effects in ways that are not immediately visible. If this is true, then the act of naming becomes more significant than it first appears. Choosing a name, speaking it, or refusing to do so all carry implications that extend beyond language. They shape how individuals are perceived and how they interact with the world around them. A name is not just what someone is called, it is part of how they exist within the structure of magic. Over time, this creates a subtle but consistent influence. Names guide recognition, reinforce identity, and connect individuals to the systems that surround them. They are used casually, but they carry a weight that is rarely acknowledged directly. And once that weight is recognized, it becomes difficult to see them as simple labels again. There is a system within the wizarding world that appears to function as a form of justice, but when examined closely, it begins to feel uncertain in ways that are not immediately obvious. Laws exist, authorities enforce them, and institutions are in place to maintain order. At first glance, this structure suggests stability, but the more attention you give to how these systems operate, the more it seems that justice is not applied as consistently as it appears. The Ministry of Magic holds a central role in this system. It defines what is legal, investigates wrongdoing, and determines punishment. However, its decisions are often influenced by pressure, perception, and urgency, rather than careful examination. When Sirius Black is imprisoned, there is no formal trial in the way one might expect. He is sent directly to Azkaban, based on the assumption of guilt rather than confirmed evidence. This suggests that the system prioritizes resolution over certainty, especially in times of fear. Azkaban itself reflects this imbalance. It is not just a prison, but a place designed to break those who are held within it. The presence of Dementors ensures that punishment extends beyond confinement. Prisoners are subjected to a constant state of despair, reliving their worst memories without relief. This form of punishment does not distinguish between levels of guilt. It affects everyone in the same way, regardless of the specifics of their actions. The use of Dementors also raises questions about control. These creatures are not simply tools. They feed on emotion, responding to the presence of human experience in ways that are difficult to regulate. Allowing them to act as enforcers of justice introduces an element that cannot be fully contained. Even those who are innocent, like Sirius, are exposed to the same conditions, suggesting that the system does not account for error in a meaningful way. At the same time, the Ministry demonstrates the ability to alter its own narrative when necessary. Events are sometimes reinterpreted, details adjusted, and information withheld to maintain a sense of order. This is particularly evident during periods when Voldemort's return is denied. Rather than acknowledging the threat, the Ministry chooses to control how the situation is perceived, prioritizing stability over transparency. The trial of Harry in his 5th year provides another example. He is charged with using magic outside of school, but the circumstances surrounding the event are not initially considered. The presence of Dementors which justified his actions, is almost overlooked in favor of enforcing the rule itself. It is only through intervention and testimony that the full context is recognized. This suggests that the system operates on procedure first, with understanding coming later, if at all. There is also a pattern of selective enforcement. Certain individuals are treated differently depending on their status, connections, or perceived importance. Lucius Malfoy, for example, avoids punishment after the First War, despite his involvement, claiming that he acted under influence. This claim is accepted, allowing him to maintain his position. In contrast, others without similar influence are not given the same opportunity to explain or defend themselves. The structure of authority within the ministry reinforces this inconsistency. Decisions can be influenced by those in power, shaping outcomes in ways that are not always aligned with fairness. This creates a system where justice is not only about what has happened, but about who is involved and how the situation is presented. What makes this theory unsettling is the possibility that justice within the wizarding world is not as stable as it appears. It functions, but not always with clarity or balance. It relies on individuals who are themselves subject to bias, fear, and limitation. As a result, the outcomes it produces can vary, sometimes aligning with truth and other times diverging from it. This does not mean that the system is entirely ineffective. It does maintain order, and it does address wrongdoing in many cases, but it also allows for gaps, moments where the process fails to account for complexity. These gaps reveal a structure that is shaped as much by human behavior as it is by defined rules. Over time, this creates an environment where justice is something that must be navigated rather than assumed. Characters within the story learn to understand its limitations, recognizing that outcomes are not always predictable or fair. They adapt, finding ways to work within or around the system, depending on what is required. In the end, the presence of law does not guarantee fairness. It provides a framework, but that framework is influenced by those who operate within it. This leaves open the possibility that justice, while present, is not always complete, and that certainty is often replaced by something more uncertain, shaped by circumstance and interpretation. There is a detail about magical creatures within the wizarding world that is often framed as classification, but begins to feel more like separation the more it is examined. Creatures are divided into categories, defined by their level of intelligence, their ability to communicate, and how closely they resemble human behavior. These distinctions are presented as practical, a way to organize and regulate interaction. But when you look more closely, the system begins to reflect something more complex, shaped by perception rather than clear boundaries. The ministry defines beings such as goblins, centaurs, and house elves differently, assigning them varying degrees of recognition and autonomy. Some are granted rights, while others are placed under control. These decisions are not always based on capability. Centaurs, for example, possess advanced understanding, language, and a structured society, yet they are distanced from wizarding governance. House elves demonstrate intelligence and emotional awareness, but are bound to serve, their status defined by obligation rather than choice. This creates a hierarchy that is not entirely consistent. Intelligence alone does not determine placement. Instead, it appears that the comfort of wizards plays a role in how these categories are applied. Creatures that align more closely with wizarding expectations are integrated more easily, while those that do not are kept separate, regardless of their abilities. This suggests that classification is influenced by familiarity and control, rather than objective criteria. The treatment of house elves illustrates this pattern clearly. They are capable of complex magic, often performing tasks that wizards themselves cannot replicate in the same way. Yet their role is defined by service, and their condition is accepted as natural within wizarding society. The idea that they might choose a different existence is rarely considered, and when it is often met with confusion or resistance. This indicates that the system is not designed to question itself, but to maintain the structure that already exists. Goblins present a different kind of tension. They possess their own culture, their own understanding of ownership, and their own approach to magic. Their relationship with wizards is marked by negotiation and conflict, shaped by differing values rather than a lack of ability. This suggests that the divide between species is not based on capability, but on incompatible perspectives that have been formalized into separate categories. Centaurs take this even further. They actively reject classification, choosing to remain apart from wizarding society. Their understanding of the world, particularly their focus on patterns in the stars, places them outside the priorities of the ministry. Yet their knowledge is not lesser, it is simply different. Their refusal to be categorized highlights the limitations of the system, showing that not all beings fit within its structure. There are also creatures that exist entirely outside these definitions, occupying spaces that are not fully understood or controlled. Acromantulas, giants, and other beings are treated primarily as threats, their complexity reduced to danger. This simplifies interaction, but it also removes the possibility of deeper understanding. The system favors clear distinctions, even when those distinctions do not fully capture reality. What makes this theory unsettling is the idea that classification within the wizarding world may be less about understanding and more about maintaining order. By defining creatures in specific ways, the ministry creates a structure that supports existing power dynamics. It determines who has authority, who has autonomy, and who is expected to exist within certain roles. This does not mean that all interactions are defined by conflict. There are moments of cooperation, of shared purpose, and of mutual respect. But these moments often occur outside the formal system, shaped by individuals rather than institutions. They reveal possibilities that the existing structure does not fully accommodate. Over time, this creates a division that feels stable on the surface, but uncertain beneath it. The categories remain in place, but the realities they attempt to describe are more fluid. Creatures think, feel, and act in ways that do not always align with how they are defined. This creates tension between classification and experience, where the system struggles to fully account for what exists. In this context, the way magical creatures are understood becomes less about clear definitions and more about perspective. The boundaries between species are not just biological or magical. They are shaped by belief, by history, and by the choices made over time. And once those boundaries are established, they begin to influence how interaction unfolds, reinforcing the distinctions they were meant to describe. The result is a world where separation feels natural, even when it may not be entirely justified. A system that appears organized but carries within it assumptions that are rarely questioned, and a structure that, once examined more closely, reveals itself to be less about what creatures are and more about how they are seen. There is a quiet assumption that runs through the wizarding world about education, one that suggests Hogwarts exists primarily to teach young witches and wizards how to control and understand their magic. Lessons are structured, subjects are divided, and students move from one year to the next as their knowledge grows. On the surface, it appears to be a complete system designed to prepare them for life beyond the school. But when you look more closely at what is taught and what is left out, the structure begins to feel incomplete in ways that are not immediately obvious. Certain subjects receive consistent attention. Charms, transfiguration, and defense against the dark arts are treated as essential, forming the core of a student's magical education. These disciplines focus on practical application, giving students the ability to perform spells, adapt to situations, and respond to threats. At the same time, other areas of knowledge are either limited or entirely absent. There is little emphasis on understanding the deeper nature of magic itself, how it originates, or how it develops over time. History of magic offers a glimpse into the past, but it is presented in a way that feels detached from the present. Students learn names, dates, and events, but the connections between those events and current practices are not always explored. This creates a sense of distance, where history becomes something to memorize rather than something to understand. The lack of engagement with this subject suggests that knowledge of the past is not considered essential to shaping the future. There is also a noticeable absence of discussion around ethics. Students learn how to cast spells, but not always when or why they should be used. The distinction between acceptable and unacceptable magic is often implied rather than examined. Dark magic is identified as dangerous, but the reasons behind that danger are not fully explored within the curriculum. This leaves students to form their own understanding, guided more by experience than by structured learning. The role of defense against the dark arts highlights this inconsistency. The subject changes frequently, with different teachers bringing different approaches each year. Some focus on practical defense, others on theory, and some fail to provide meaningful instruction at all. This lack of continuity means that students receive an uneven education in one of the most critical areas. It also suggests that the system is not fully stable, relying on circumstances rather than design to determine what is taught. Outside of formal lessons, much of what students learn comes from experience. They encounter challenges, solve problems, and develop skills through situations that are not part of the curriculum. These moments often provide deeper understanding than structured classes, suggesting that the system itself does not account for all aspects of learning. It prepares students in some ways, but leaves gaps that must be filled through other means. The presence of restricted knowledge further complicates this idea. Certain books, spells, and areas of study are kept hidden or controlled, accessible only under specific conditions. While this may be intended to prevent misuse, it also limits exposure to parts of magic that could be understood more fully. The restriction of knowledge creates a boundary between what is taught and what exists, reinforcing the idea that education is selective rather than comprehensive. Teachers themselves play a significant role in shaping how subjects are understood. Their personal beliefs, experiences, and methods influence what students take away from each lesson. This introduces variation that is not standardized, meaning that two students may leave Hogwarts with different levels of understanding depending on who taught them. The system allows for this flexibility, but it also means that education is not entirely consistent. What makes this theory unsettling is the possibility that Hogwarts does not aim to provide a complete understanding of magic. Instead, it offers a framework, focusing on control and application while leaving deeper questions unanswered. Students are taught how to use magic effectively, but not necessarily how to question it, redefine it, or explore its limits. This creates a balance between knowledge and restriction. Enough is taught to ensure competence, but not enough to fully explore what magic can become. Whether this is intentional or simply a result of tradition is not entirely clear. It may be a way to maintain stability, preventing students from reaching conclusions that could challenge existing structures. Over time, this approach shapes how magic is perceived. It becomes something that is used within established boundaries, rather than something that is constantly examined or expanded. Students learn to operate within the system, adapting to its expectations rather than redefining them. In the end, Hogwarts provides more than just education. It establishes a way of thinking about magic, one that emphasizes practice over theory and tradition over exploration. It prepares students for the world they are entering, but it may also limit how that world can change, quietly shaping not just what they know, but how they understand what is possible. There is a recurring idea within the wizarding world that death marks a clear boundary, separating what is living from what is not. It is treated as an end, something final and irreversible. Yet when you begin to look more closely at how death is actually experienced and understood, that boundary becomes less defined. There are traces, echoes, and even forms of presence that remain, suggesting that death does not function as a complete separation, but as a transition into something less understood. Ghosts are the most visible example of this. They are described as imprints of witches and wizards who chose to remain behind, unable or unwilling to move on. They retain memory, personality, and awareness, yet they are not fully present in the way the living are. Their existence suggests that part of a person can persist independently of the body, continuing to interact with the world in a limited way. At the same time, ghosts are incomplete. They do not grow, they do not change, and they remain fixed in the state they were in when they died. This incompleteness raises questions about what is lost and what remains. If a ghost is only a fragment, then the rest of the person must exist elsewhere, or not at all. The wizarding world does not provide a clear answer, leaving open the possibility that death involves a division rather than a disappearance. What stays behind is not the whole, but it is enough to suggest continuity. Horcruxes present a darker version of this idea. Instead of allowing the soul to move on naturally, they force it to remain divided, anchored to objects through acts that disrupt its integrity. Each Horcrux contains a piece of the soul, preserving it in a way that prevents complete death. But this preservation comes at a cost. The fragments are unstable, incomplete, and capable of influencing the world around them in unsettling ways. They are not simply remnants. They are active, carrying intention and presence. The existence of the Resurrection Stone introduces another perspective. It does not return the dead to life in a physical sense, but it allows them to be seen and heard by the one who uses it. The figures it produces are described as distant, not entirely part of the living world, yet not entirely separate either. They exist in a space that is neither fully present nor fully gone, suggesting that death does not remove a person completely, but alters how they can be perceived. There are also moments where connections between the living and the dead persist without the use of objects. Harry's interactions with his parents through the echoes produced by Priori Incantatem, and later through the stone, indicate that something of them remains accessible. These moments are brief and limited, but they reinforce the idea that death does not entirely sever connection. It changes it, placing it beyond ordinary reach, but not removing it entirely. The veil within the Department of Mysteries offers perhaps the most direct representation of this boundary. It is described as a passage, a threshold between the living world and whatever lies beyond. Voices can be heard through it, though not clearly understood. Those who approach it feel drawn toward it, as if it represents something familiar but distant. When Sirius passes through, there is no return, no visible continuation, only absence. Yet the presence of the veil itself suggests that death is not a void, but a crossing. This creates a pattern where death is consistently shown as a state that allows for partial continuation. Whether through ghosts, Horcruxes, or brief connections, there are always elements that remain. None of these forms represent a complete return, but none of them represent complete disappearance either. They exist in a space between, where presence is reduced but not eliminated. What makes this theory unsettling is the possibility that death within the wizarding world is not as final as it is often believed to be. It is not simply an end, but a transformation into something that can still interact, influence, or be perceived under certain conditions. This creates uncertainty around what it means to truly be gone. At the same time, these forms of continuation are never complete. They are limited, constrained, and often tied to specific conditions. A ghost cannot become fully alive again. A Horcrux cannot restore the soul it contains to its original state. The figures seen through the Resurrection Stone cannot remain indefinitely. This suggests that while death does not erase everything, it imposes boundaries that cannot be easily crossed. In this sense, death becomes less about absence and more about distance. Those who have passed on are not entirely removed, but they are no longer fully part of the same reality. They exist beyond reach, except in moments where magic allows for brief interaction. These moments are enough to suggest continuity, but not enough to restore what was lost. Over time, this creates a world where death is present, not just as an event, but as an ongoing condition. It lingers in places, in objects, and in memory, shaping how the living understand what has been left behind. And the more these traces are examined, the less certain the boundary becomes, leaving open the possibility that what lies beyond is not entirely separate from what remains. There is a pattern in the way influence operates within the wizarding world that is rarely addressed directly, yet becomes increasingly visible when you follow the actions of certain individuals over time. Power is not always applied through force or authority. In many cases, it moves more quietly, shaping decisions, guiding outcomes, and creating conditions where events unfold in a particular direction without appearing controlled. Albus Dumbledore represents one of the clearest examples of this kind of influence. He is often seen as a figure of guidance, someone who offers support while allowing others to make their own choices. But when you look more closely at how he interacts with the people around him, a different pattern begins to emerge. He provides information selectively, reveals certain truths while withholding others, and positions individuals in ways that lead them towards specific outcomes. This approach is evident in his relationship with Harry. From the beginning, Dumbledore is aware that Harry's role in the conflict with Voldemort will be significant, yet he does not explain this fully. Instead, he allows Harry to grow within a limited understanding, giving him pieces of information at different stages. This creates a progression where Harry's actions appear self-directed, even though they are influenced by what he has been told and what has been left unsaid. The withholding of information is not random. It is carefully timed. Dumbledore waits until Harry is ready, or perhaps until the situation requires it, before revealing more. This suggests a level of planning that goes beyond simple mentorship. It indicates that Dumbledore is shaping the path forward, not by forcing decisions, but by controlling what is known at any given moment. This method extends to others as well. Snape, for example, is placed in a position where his role depends on maintaining a delicate balance between two sides. Dumbledore entrusts him with critical responsibilities, but also limits what others know about him. This creates a situation where Snape's actions are misunderstood by nearly everyone, allowing him to operate within a space that is both hidden and controlled. The Order of the Phoenix itself functions within this structure. Members are given roles, tasks, and information based on what Dumbledore determines they need to know. This creates an organization that operates efficiently but not transparently. Decisions are made at the top, and while others contribute, they do so within a framework that has already been shaped. There are also moments where Dumbledore allows events to unfold without intervention, even when he has the ability to act. This restraint can be seen as trust, allowing others to develop and make their own choices. But it can also be interpreted as part of a larger strategy, where outcomes are influenced by the absence of action as much as by direct involvement. What makes this pattern unsettling is the possibility that influence within the wizarding world often operates beneath the surface. It is not always visible, and it does not always appear intentional, yet it can guide events in ways that are difficult to recognize until they have already occurred. Dumbledore's actions suggest a belief that certain outcomes are necessary, and that achieving them requires a careful balance between guidance and distance. He does not impose decisions directly, but he creates the conditions in which those decisions are likely to be made. This allows individuals to feel that they are acting independently, even when their path has been shaped in advance. At the same time, this approach raises questions about autonomy. If choices are influenced by what is known and unknown, then the freedom to choose is affected by the structure of information itself. Dumbledore's method relies on this principle, using knowledge as a way to guide rather than to dictate. This creates a form of leadership that is both effective and ambiguous. It achieves results, but it does so in a way that is not always transparent. The people involved are part of the process, but they are not always aware of the full context in which they are acting. In the end, influence within the wizarding world is not always defined by visible authority. It can exist in the quiet arrangement of information, in the timing of revelations, and in the decisions that are encouraged without being explicitly stated. Dumbledore embodies this form of influence, shaping events through a combination of understanding, restraint, and careful planning. And once this pattern is recognized, it becomes difficult to separate what is chosen freely from what has been guided into place. There is a quiet pattern in the way loyalty is understood within the wizarding world, one that appears straightforward on the surface, but becomes more uncertain the more it is examined. Loyalty is often treated as something stable, a bond that connects individuals through trust and shared purpose. It is seen as a strength, something that defines friendships and alliances. But when you follow how loyalty actually behaves across different characters, it begins to feel less like a fixed trait and more like something that shifts depending on circumstance, perception, and time. The relationship between wizards and their wands provides an unexpected reflection of this idea. Wand allegiance is not permanent. It can change based on actions rather than ownership, transferring from one wizard to another through acts of disarming or defeat. This suggests that loyalty, even in something as fundamental as a wand, is conditional. It responds to strength, to outcomes, and to the dynamics of interaction rather than remaining constant. This same pattern appears in human relationships. Characters who are considered loyal at one point may act differently under pressure. Peter Pettigrew serves as a clear example. Once part of a close group defined by trust, he later betrays that trust in a way that reshapes the entire course of events. His loyalty does not disappear suddenly, it shifts, influenced by fear and the desire for self-preservation. This suggests that loyalty is not simply a matter of character, but of circumstance. At the same time, there are examples of loyalty that persist even under extreme conditions. Severus Snape's actions, when fully understood, reveal a form of loyalty that is sustained over many years, despite misunderstanding and isolation. Yet even this loyalty is complex. It is tied to personal history, to emotion, and to a specific promise rather than to a broader sense of allegiance. It exists, but it is not simple or easily defined. The Order of the Phoenix operates on the assumption that its members share a common loyalty to a cause. For the most part, this holds true, but the structure of the group still depends on trust that is not always complete. Information is shared selectively, and not every member is aware of the full plan. This creates a situation where loyalty exists within limits, shaped by what each individual knows and how they understand their role. Even within Hogwarts, loyalty between students is influenced by the houses they belong to. These divisions create strong internal bonds, but they also reinforce separation between groups. Loyalty becomes tied to identity, encouraging support within one's own house, while creating distance from others. This suggests that loyalty can be directed and shaped by the structures people are placed within. There are also moments where loyalty is tested by conflicting responsibilities. Characters are forced to choose between different forms of allegiance, whether to individuals, to ideals, or to their own sense of right and wrong. These choices reveal that loyalty is not always aligned with consistency. It can require change, adaptation, and even contradiction, depending on what is at stake. What makes this theory unsettling is the idea that loyalty within the wizarding world is not as stable as it is often believed to be. It can shift, evolve, or break under pressure, influenced by factors that are not always visible. It is shaped by fear, by belief, and by the circumstances surrounding each decision. At the same time, loyalty retains its importance. It continues to define relationships and guide actions, even as it changes. This creates a balance where loyalty is both reliable and uncertain, capable of holding strong in some moments while faltering in others. The behavior of wands reinforces this balance. They respond to the actions of their wielder, adjusting their allegiance based on what has occurred. This mirrors the way human loyalty can change in response to events, suggesting that the concept itself is not fixed, but responsive. In this context, Loyalty becomes something that is maintained rather than assumed. It requires ongoing choice, shaped by experience and reinforced through action. It is not simply a trait that a person possesses, but something that is continually defined by what they do. Over time, this creates a world where loyalty exists as a dynamic force. It connects individuals, but it also reflects the complexity of their decisions. It can strengthen bonds, but it can also reveal their limits. And once this pattern is recognized, it becomes clear that loyalty is not just about staying the same. It is about how and why it changes. There is a pattern in the way fear operates within the wizarding world that often appears as a reaction, but begins to feel more like a force that shapes events the more closely it is examined. Fear is not only something characters experience. It influences decisions, alters perception, and spreads through communities in ways that affect how the entire world responds to uncertainty. Over time, it becomes less of an emotion and more of a condition that quietly directs behavior. The presence of dementors reflects this idea in a physical form. They do not create fear, but they draw it out, intensifying what is already there. Their effect is not limited to a single moment. It lingers, leaving individuals weakened and more susceptible to despair. This suggests that fear, once amplified, can sustain itself, continuing to influence thought and action even after the immediate cause is gone. At the same time, fear often leads to avoidance. The refusal to speak Voldemort's name begins as a response to danger, but it evolves into a habit that reinforces his presence. By avoiding the name, people give it weight, allowing fear to define how they interact with the idea of him. This creates a cycle where fear shapes behavior, and behavior in turn strengthens fear. The Ministry of Magic demonstrates how fear can influence larger systems. When faced with the possibility of Voldemort's return, the initial response is denial. Acknowledging the threat would require action, change, and uncertainty. By rejecting the idea, the Ministry maintains a sense of control, but at the cost of delaying necessary preparation. This decision is not based on evidence alone, but on the discomfort of confronting what that evidence suggests. Fear also affects individual choices. Characters who might act differently under calmer circumstances make decisions that prioritize safety over truth. This can lead to hesitation, to misjudgment, and to actions that have lasting consequences. Fear does not always result in inaction. Sometimes it drives people toward decisions that feel immediate and necessary, even if they are not fully considered. The spread of fear is another important element. It moves through communities, influencing not just those who experience it directly, but those who hear about it. Rumors, warnings, and shared experiences create a collective understanding that shapes how people behave. This shared fear can unify, but it can also limit, creating boundaries around what is considered possible or safe. There are also moments where fear becomes internalized. Characters carry it with them, shaping how they see themselves and their place in the world. This can affect confidence, decision-making, and the willingness to act. Fear becomes part of identity, influencing not just what is done, but what is believed to be possible. What makes this theory unsettling is the possibility that fear within the wizarding world is not just a response to events, but a factor that actively shapes them. It influences how threats are perceived, how information is handled, and how decisions are made. It can delay action, redirect attention, and create conditions where certain outcomes become more likely. At the same time, fear is not always negative. It can prompt caution, encourage awareness, and highlight risk. It serves a purpose, helping individuals recognize danger and respond to it. But when it becomes dominant, it can overshadow other considerations, limiting the ability to see clearly. The interaction between fear and action creates a dynamic that is difficult to balance. Too little fear can lead to recklessness, while too much can result in paralysis or misdirection. The wizarding world moves within this balance, with different characters responding in different ways depending on their experience and understanding. Over time, fear becomes woven into the structure of events. It shapes responses, influences outcomes, and leaves traces that persist beyond the moments in which it is most intense. It is not always visible, but it is present, guiding behavior in subtle ways. In the end, fear is not just something that happens to individuals. It is something that moves through the world, connecting actions and decisions in ways that are not always immediately clear. And once its influence is recognized, it becomes difficult to separate what is done from the conditions that shaped it. There is a pattern in the way identity is understood within the wizarding world that seems clear at first, but becomes increasingly uncertain the more it is examined. People are often defined by lineage, by house, by reputation, or by the roles they are expected to fulfill. These labels create a sense of structure, allowing others to understand who someone is within a larger system. But when you look more closely at how characters actually develop over time, it becomes clear that identity is not as fixed as it appears. Blood status is one of the most visible examples of this structure. Terms like pure blood, half-blood, and muggle-born are used to categorize individuals, suggesting that identity can be traced through ancestry. These distinctions carry social meaning, influencing how people are treated and what is expected of them. Yet when you examine the abilities and actions of individuals within these categories, the differences become less consistent. Skill, intelligence, and character do not align neatly with lineage, indicating that these labels describe perception more than reality. House affiliation at Hogwarts reinforces this idea. Students are sorted into groups that are meant to reflect their traits, and over time, those traits become associated with their identity. A Gryffindor is expected to be brave, a Slytherin ambitious, a Ravenclaw thoughtful, and a Hufflepuff loyal. These expectations shape how students see themselves and how they are seen by others. But as individuals grow, they often display qualities that extend beyond these categories, suggesting that identity cannot be fully contained within them. There are also characters whose identities shift significantly over time. Neville Longbottom, for example, begins as someone uncertain and hesitant, but gradually develops confidence and strength. His identity changes through experience, shaped by challenges rather than predetermined traits. This transformation highlights the idea that identity is not static, but something that evolves. The use of magical transformation further complicates this concept. Polyjuice Potion allows individuals to take on the appearance of others, altering how they are perceived without changing who they are internally. Animagus transformation changes physical form entirely, yet the person remains the same beneath it. These examples show that outward identity can be altered without affecting the underlying self, separating appearance from essence. At the same time, there are moments where identity is influenced by external forces. The fragment of Voldemort's soul within Harry connects him to qualities and abilities that are not entirely his own. This creates a situation where identity is shared, or at least affected, by something beyond personal experience. It raises the possibility that identity can be shaped not only by what a person is, but by what is attached to them. Names, reputation, and history also play a role. Characters inherit expectations based on their family or past actions, shaping how others interact with them. Draco Malfoy is seen through the lens of his family's beliefs, while Sirius Black is judged by a reputation that does not reflect his true actions. These perceptions influence identity from the outside, creating a version of a person that may not align with who they actually are. What makes this theory unsettling is the possibility that identity within the wizarding world is not entirely self-determined. It is influenced by structures, expectations, and forces that extend beyond the individual. Labels are applied early, perceptions are formed quickly, and these elements can shape how a person develops over time. At the same time, identity is not completely controlled by these factors. Characters demonstrate the ability to change, to redefine themselves, and to move beyond what is expected. This creates a balance between influence and autonomy, where identity is shaped but not entirely fixed. The interaction between these elements suggests that identity is both constructed and discovered. It is built through experience, shaped by perception, and influenced by forces that are not always visible. It is not a single, stable definition, but a process that unfolds over time. In the end, identity within the wizarding world exists as something fluid. It can be guided, altered, and reinterpreted depending on circumstance. It is defined by what is known, but also by what changes. And once this fluidity is recognized, the idea of a fixed identity becomes less certain, replaced by something that is constantly evolving beneath the surface. There is a subtle pattern in the way luck and coincidence appear within the wizarding world, one that often feels incidental at first, but begins to seem more structured when viewed over time. Events align in ways that allow certain outcomes to occur. Objects are found at the right moment, and individuals arrive exactly when they are needed. These moments are usually accepted as chance, small alignments within a larger story. But when they happen repeatedly, the idea emerges that what appears random may not be entirely without direction. Felix Felicis offers a direct example of this concept. It is described as liquid luck, a potion that does not change reality directly, but instead guides the drinker through a sequence of actions that lead to a favorable outcome. Under its influence, decisions feel instinctive, paths become clearer, and obstacles are avoided without fully understanding how. The potion does not force events to happen. It alters the way the individual moves through them, creating a chain of choices that align with a desired result. This suggests that luck within the wizarding world may not be a separate force, but a pattern of probability that can be influenced. Felix Felicis does not create success out of nothing. It adjusts the path taken to reach that success, making certain outcomes more likely by guiding behavior in subtle ways. This implies that events are not entirely fixed, but exist within a range of possibilities that can be navigated. Outside of the potion, similar patterns appear without direct magical intervention. Harry's encounters with key objects and individuals often occur at moments that seem unlikely, yet necessary. The discovery of the diary, the connection with the mirror, and the timing of certain revelations all contribute to outcomes that depend on precise alignment. While each moment can be explained individually, together they form a sequence that feels less accidental. At the same time, prophecy introduces another layer to this idea. It describes potential outcomes, but does not dictate exactly how they will occur. The prophecy concerning Harry and Voldemort sets a condition, but the path toward fulfilling that condition is shaped by choices and circumstances. This creates a space where multiple possibilities exist, with certain actions bringing one outcome closer than others. The interaction between choice and outcome becomes central here. If events can align in ways that favor a particular result, then the role of coincidence becomes less clear. It may not be that events are random, but that they follow patterns that are not immediately visible. These patterns can be influenced by knowledge, by action, or in the case of Felix Felicis, by magical enhancement. There are also moments where unlikely success occurs without explanation. Characters survive situations where the odds are not in their favor, or achieve results that depend on precise timing. These instances are often attributed to chance, but they contribute to the sense that something within the structure of events allows for these outcomes to occur. What makes this theory unsettling is the possibility that luck within the wizarding world is not entirely random. It may be a reflection of underlying patterns that guide events towards certain outcomes, even when those outcomes are not consciously directed. This does not remove choice, but it suggests that choice operates within a framework that influences probability. At the same time, luck does not guarantee success. Felix Felicis works within limits, and its effects depend on the context in which it is used. It cannot create something from nothing, and it cannot overcome every obstacle. This indicates that while probability can be influenced, it cannot be completely controlled. The presence of luck as a concept within the wizarding world suggests that events are not purely deterministic, nor entirely random. They exist within a balance, where outcomes are shaped by both chance and influence. This creates a system where small changes can have significant effects, and where the path taken can alter the result. Over time, this pattern becomes more noticeable. What appears as coincidence begins to feel like alignment, where events connect in ways that are not immediately obvious. Characters move through situations that seem guided, even when no clear force is directing them. In the end, luck becomes less about randomness and more about movement within possibility. It reflects the way events can shift, align, and unfold based on a combination of factors that are not always visible. And once this idea is considered, the line between chance and structure becomes more difficult to define, leaving open the possibility that what seems accidental may be part of something more consistent beneath the surface. There is a detail in the way objects function within the wizarding world that often goes unnoticed because it is so common. Objects are enchanted, given purpose, and then left to operate within that purpose over long periods of time. At first, this seems like a practical extension of magic. A tool is created, it performs its function, and it continues to do so as long as the enchantment remains. But when you begin to examine how certain objects behave, the idea emerges that they are not always passive. They may carry intention, memory, or influence that extends beyond their original design. The sorting hat is one of the clearest examples. It was created by the founders of Hogwarts, each of whom contributed a part of themselves to it. The hat does not simply follow instructions. It speaks, evaluates, and makes decisions based on what it perceives. This suggests that the magic placed within it preserved more than function. It retained aspects of thought, allowing the hat to continue operating in a way that resembles awareness. Other objects display similar patterns. The diary that once belonged to Tom Riddle does not merely store information, it interacts with the person who uses it, responding to questions and guiding behavior. It influences Ginny Weasley over time, drawing her deeper into its presence. This level of interaction suggests that the object contains more than a record. It carries a fragment of intention, capable of affecting the world around it. Even objects without a direct connection to a soul can demonstrate complex behavior. The Marauder's map tracks individuals in real time, responding to commands and adjusting its display based on who is viewing it. It recognizes certain users, hides its information from others, and reveals details with precision. This indicates that the enchantments placed upon it allow for a level of responsiveness that goes beyond simple function. The Sword of Gryffindor presents another variation. It appears when needed, responding to acts of courage rather than physical location. It can absorb qualities from what it comes into contact with, strengthening itself over time. This behavior suggests that the object is not static. It evolves, adapting to the conditions in which it is used. At the same time, there are objects that seem to resist certain individuals. Wands, for example, may not perform as effectively when used by someone they do not recognize as their rightful owner. This resistance is not mechanical. It reflects a form of alignment between the object and the individual, suggesting that the object itself plays a role in determining how it is used. There are also instances where objects retain traces of past events. Certain locations and items carry impressions of what has happened around them, allowing those experiences to be revisited or felt again. This suggests that magic does not simply alter objects in the moment. It leaves a lasting imprint, creating a connection between the object and its history. What makes this theory unsettling is the possibility that objects within the wizarding world are not entirely under control. Once enchanted, they may continue to operate in ways that are influenced by what has been placed within them. They may respond, adapt, or even affect those who interact with them, carrying forward elements of intention that were never meant to persist indefinitely. At the same time, these objects are integrated into daily life. They are used, trusted, and relied upon without constant awareness of how they function beneath the surface. This creates a sense of familiarity that can obscure their complexity. People interact with them as tools, even when their behavior suggests something more. The accumulation of magic over time may contribute to this effect. Objects that have been used, enchanted, and interacted with repeatedly may develop layers of influence that extend beyond their original purpose. This creates a system where magic is not just applied, but retained, shaping how objects behave long after they were created. In this context, objects become part of a larger network of interaction. They connect past and present, intention and outcome, in ways that are not always visible. They serve practical functions, but they also carry traces of what has been placed within them, influencing how they are experienced. Over time, this creates a world where the boundary between object and presence becomes less clear. Items are not simply used. They participate, responding to conditions and contributing to the unfolding of events. And once this possibility is considered, it becomes difficult to see them as entirely passive again. There is a pattern in the way control is exercised within the wizarding world that often appears structured, but becomes more uncertain the more closely it is examined. Authority is established through institutions, through roles, and through accepted systems of governance. On the surface, this creates a sense of order. But when you follow how control is actually maintained, it begins to feel less like a stable framework and more like something that shifts depending on perception, influence, and timing. The Ministry of Magic represents the most visible form of this control. It defines laws, regulates behavior, and oversees the functioning of the wizarding world. Yet, its authority is not absolute. It depends on belief, on compliance, and on the ability to maintain a consistent narrative. When that narrative is challenged, the structure begins to show its limitations. Decisions are adjusted, priorities change, and control becomes something that must be reinforced rather than assumed. This is particularly evident during periods of uncertainty. When Voldemort returns, the Ministry initially refuses to acknowledge it. This denial is not simply a mistake. It is an attempt to preserve stability by controlling how reality is presented. By shaping perception, the Ministry maintains its authority, even as the situation itself becomes more unstable. This suggests that control is closely tied to what people believe to be true, rather than what is objectively happening. The use of information plays a central role in this process. What is shared, what is withheld, and how it is presented all influence how events are understood. The Daily Prophet, for example, reflects the Ministry's perspective during key moments, shaping public opinion through selective reporting. This creates a feedback loop where authority influences perception, and perception, in turn, reinforces authority. There are also instances where control is exercised through restriction rather than communication. Certain areas of magic are limited, certain objects are monitored, and certain knowledge is kept out of reach. These restrictions are presented as necessary, but they also serve to define the boundaries of what individuals can access or understand. By limiting exposure, the system maintains a level of control over how magic is used and perceived. At the same time, control is not always centralized. Individuals with influence can shape events in ways that operate alongside or outside formal structures. Dumbledore, for example, exerts a form of control that does not rely on official authority. His influence comes from knowledge, reputation, and the trust placed in him by others. This creates an alternative structure, one that operates parallel to the Ministry while still affecting the same world. The presence of magical artifacts also contributes to this dynamic. Objects like the Elder Wand carry a form of power that exists independently of institutions. Control over such objects is not determined by law, but by action and recognition. This introduces an element that cannot be fully regulated, existing outside the formal systems that attempt to maintain order. What makes this theory unsettling is the possibility that control within the wizarding world is not as stable as it appears. It is maintained through a combination of belief, influence, and restriction, rather than through absolute authority. It can shift, adapt, and even weaken depending on how these elements interact. At the same time, control is necessary for structure to exist. Without it, the system would lose coherence, and the ability to coordinate actions would diminish. This creates a balance where control must be present, but cannot be entirely fixed. It must respond to changing conditions, adjusting in ways that are not always predictable. The interaction between authority and perception becomes central to this balance. Control is effective as long as it is accepted, but once it is questioned, it must be reinforced or redefined. This creates moments where the system reveals its underlying uncertainty, showing that it depends on more than just rules to function. Over time, this dynamic shapes how the wizarding world operates. It creates a structure that appears stable, but is constantly adjusting beneath the surface. Decisions are made, enforced, and sometimes revised, reflecting the ongoing effort to maintain order within a system that is not entirely fixed. In the end, control is not simply a matter of authority. It is a process influenced by how information is managed, how power is distributed, and how individuals respond to both. And once this process is recognized, the idea of a stable, unchanging system becomes less certain, replaced by something that is continually being maintained. There is a quiet pattern in the way protection functions within the wizarding world, one that is often described as powerful but not always fully understood. Protection is usually seen as something that blocks harm, a force that stands between danger and the person it is meant to shield. But when you begin to examine how certain protections actually behave, the idea emerges that they do more than simply defend. They shape outcomes, redirect actions, and create conditions where events unfold differently than they otherwise would. The protection created by Lily Potter's sacrifice is the most well-known example. It is often described as a shield formed by love, something that prevents Voldemort from harming Harry directly. But this protection does not remain limited to a single moment. It persists, extending beyond the initial event and influencing future interactions. It becomes part of Harry's existence, altering how certain forms of magic affect him. This persistence suggests that protection is not just a reaction to danger, but a lasting force that continues to operate over time. It does not simply stop an attack, it changes the relationship between the one who is protected and the one who seeks to harm them. Voldemort's inability to touch Harry without consequence reflects this shift, showing that the protection reshapes how magic interacts between them. At the same time, protection often depends on specific conditions. The extension of Lily's protection through Petunia's home relies on the concept of shared blood. As long as Harry can call that place home, the protection remains active. This creates a link between environment and safety, suggesting that protection is not entirely internal. It can be tied to places, to relationships, and to ongoing circumstances. There are also moments where protection appears to guide events rather than simply prevent them. Harry survives situations that seem unlikely, not always because harm is directly blocked, but because circumstances align in ways that allow him to continue. This raises the possibility that protection influences probability, shaping how events unfold rather than stopping them outright. The Patronus charm provides another perspective. It does not destroy Dementors, but it drives them away, creating space where their influence cannot reach. The effectiveness of the charm depends on the caster's ability to focus on a specific emotional state, suggesting that protection is connected to internal conditions as well as external action. It is not just about casting a spell, but about sustaining the state that allows that spell to function. There are also protective enchantments placed on locations, such as Hogwarts and Grimmauld Place. These protections do not simply block entry. They conceal, redirect, and confuse, altering how the space can be perceived or accessed. This indicates that protection can operate by changing perception as much as by creating barriers. it does not always stop something from happening. It changes how and whether it can occur. What makes this theory unsettling is the possibility that protection within the wizarding world is not purely defensive. It may actively shape events, guiding outcomes in subtle ways that are not immediately visible. It creates conditions where certain paths become more likely, while others are less accessible. At the same time, protection is not absolute. It can be broken, bypassed, or weakened depending on circumstances. This suggests that it operates within limits, influenced by factors such as intent, connection, and the strength of the magic involved. It is powerful, but not unchanging. The interaction between protection and action creates a dynamic where safety is not guaranteed, but influenced. Characters move through situations where protection is present, but still must make choices that affect the outcome. This balance ensures that protection does not remove risk entirely, but alters how that risk is experienced. Over time, protection becomes part of the structure of events. It exists alongside danger, shaping how it is encountered and how it can be avoided. It does not eliminate uncertainty, but it changes its form, creating pathways that would not exist otherwise. In the end, protection is more than a barrier. It is a force that interacts with the world, influencing how events unfold and how individuals move through them. And once this is considered, it becomes clear that safety within the wizarding world is not just about what is stopped, but about what is allowed to happen instead. There is a pattern in the way knowledge is distributed within the wizarding world that often appears natural, but becomes more deliberate the more it is examined. Information is not shared evenly. Some things are taught openly, while others are kept restricted, passed only between certain individuals, or revealed only when necessary. At first, this seems like a practical approach, a way to prevent misuse and maintain stability. But over time, it begins to feel less like protection and more like control over what is allowed to be understood. Books exist in abundance at Hogwarts, yet access to some of them is limited. The restricted section contains spells and information that are considered dangerous, requiring permission to enter. This creates a boundary between what is considered acceptable knowledge and what is not. Students are aware that more exists than they are allowed to see, but they are not given full access to it. This suggests that knowledge itself is treated as something that must be managed carefully. At the same time, certain individuals possess information that others do not. Dumbledore, for example, understands aspects of Voldemort's past and the nature of Horcruxes long before anyone else does. He chooses when and how to share this information, guiding others based on what they are ready to know. This creates a structure where knowledge is not simply discovered. It is given, withheld, and revealed in stages. This selective distribution of knowledge shapes how events unfold. Characters act based on what they understand, making decisions that are influenced by the information available to them at the time. When that information is incomplete, their actions reflect that limitation. This creates situations where outcomes depend not only on what is true, but on what is known. The Half-Blood Prince's book introduces another dimension to this idea. It contains annotations that improve spells and offer new approaches, providing knowledge that is not part of the standard curriculum. This knowledge is hidden in plain sight, accessible only to someone who happens to find it. It suggests that information can exist outside formal structures, waiting to be discovered rather than intentionally taught. There are also moments where knowledge is lost or obscured over time. Certain spells, objects, and practices are no longer widely understood, existing only in fragments or in the memories of a few. This loss creates gaps in understanding, where the past holds information that is not fully carried into the present. It reinforces the idea that knowledge is not static, but subject to change, disappearance, and rediscovery. The role of memory ties into this as well. Information is not only stored in books, but in people. When individuals are removed, their knowledge can be lost with them, unless it has been passed on. This creates a reliance on transmission, where understanding depends on continuity between generations. When that continuity is broken, knowledge becomes incomplete. What makes this theory unsettling is the possibility that knowledge within the wizarding world is not simply available to be learned. It is structured, controlled, and sometimes limited in ways that shape how individuals understand their reality. What is known defines what can be done, and what is not known creates boundaries that may not be recognized. At the same time, knowledge is not entirely confined. Characters find ways to access information outside formal systems, discovering things through experience, exploration, and unexpected sources. This suggests that while knowledge can be controlled, it cannot be entirely contained. The interaction between access and restriction creates a dynamic where understanding is always partial. Individuals operate within the limits of what they know, even as more exists beyond those limits. This creates a sense of uncertainty, where the full picture is rarely visible all at once. Over time, this pattern shapes how the wizarding world functions. Decisions are made, actions are taken, and events unfold based on information that is incomplete or selectively revealed. This does not prevent progress, but it does influence the path that progress takes. In the end, knowledge is not just something that exists. It is something that is managed, distributed, and experienced differently depending on circumstance. And once this is recognized, it becomes clear that understanding within the wizarding world is not only about discovery, but about what is allowed to be known and when. There is a pattern in the way space functions within the wizarding world that often feels convenient, but becomes more complex the more closely it is examined. Places do not always behave as fixed locations. They expand, contract, conceal, and reveal themselves depending on how they are approached. At first, this appears to be a practical use of magic, allowing spaces to hold more than they physically should. But over time, it begins to suggest that space itself is not entirely stable and may be shaped by intention as much as by structure. The simplest example of this is the use of extension charms. A small object can contain far more than its external dimensions would suggest, creating an internal space that does not match what is seen from the outside. Hermione's beaded bag demonstrates this clearly, holding a wide range of items without any visible change to its size. This indicates that space can be manipulated in ways that separate interior and exterior reality, allowing them to exist independently. This separation becomes more pronounced in places like tents at the Quidditch World Cup. From the outside, they appear modest, but inside, they contain multiple rooms, furnishings, and living spaces. The difference between what is seen and what exists within suggests that space is not bound by physical constraints in the way it is in the non-magical world. It can be expanded, shaped, and structured according to need. Hogwarts itself reflects this instability on a larger scale. Its corridors shift, its staircases move, and its rooms appear or disappear depending on circumstances. The Room of Requirement takes this even further, creating entirely new spaces based on the needs of those who seek it. This behavior suggests that space within the castle is not fixed, but responsive, capable of changing form in ways that align with intention. There are also locations that exist only under specific conditions. Platform 9 3/4 is not visible at all times. It requires a particular method of access, existing alongside the ordinary world without being part of it. Diagon Alley functions in a similar way, hidden from those who do not know how to find it. These places are not separate in distance, but in perception, suggesting that space can overlap without being fully shared. The concept of apparition introduces another dimension to this idea. Wizards are able to move from one place to another instantly, bypassing the space in between. This suggests that distance, while still present, can be ignored under certain conditions. Space is not removed, but it becomes irrelevant to the act of movement, indicating that its role can be altered. There are also limitations to this manipulation. Certain places are protected against apparition, preventing entry or exit through magical means. This suggests that while space can be altered, it can also be controlled, restricted in ways that define where and how movement is possible. These boundaries reinforce the idea that space is flexible, but not without rules. What makes this theory unsettling is the possibility that space within the wizarding world is not a stable framework, but a variable one. It can be expanded, concealed, or reshaped depending on the magic applied to it. This means that the environment is not always what it appears to be, and that the relationship between location and reality is not fixed. At the same time, this flexibility allows for a world that is layered and interconnected. Spaces can exist within other spaces, hidden from view, but still accessible under the right conditions. This creates a structure where the visible world is only part of what exists, with additional layers that can be revealed through knowledge or action. The interaction between perception and space becomes central to this idea. What can be seen is not always what is present, and what is present is not always immediately visible. Access depends on understanding, on method, and on the ability to navigate these layers. Over time, this creates a world where movement and location are defined not just by distance, but by awareness. Knowing how to reach a place becomes as important as the place itself. Space is not simply traveled through. It is engaged with, shaped by the way it is approached. In the end, space within the wizarding world exists as something more than a physical dimension. It is a system that can be altered, expanded, and hidden, creating environments that respond to magic in ways that are not always predictable. And once this is considered, the idea of a fixed location becomes less certain, replaced by something that can shift depending on how it is understood. There is a pattern in the way punishment is applied within the wizarding world that often appears justified on the surface, but becomes more uneven the more closely it is examined. Consequences exist, rules are enforced, and those who break them are expected to face the results of their actions. At first, this suggests a clear system where behavior leads to predictable outcomes. But when you follow how punishment is actually carried out, it begins to feel less consistent, shaped by circumstance as much as by the actions themselves. The use of Azkaban reflects this imbalance most clearly. It is not simply a place of confinement, but one where punishment extends into the mind. The presence of Dementors ensures that those imprisoned experience a continuous loss of hope, forced to relive their worst memories. This form of punishment does not vary based on the severity of the crime. It is applied broadly, affecting all prisoners in the same way, regardless of their individual circumstances. At the same time, there are instances where punishment is avoided entirely. Certain individuals escape consequences through influence, connections, or the ability to reshape how their actions are perceived. Lucius Malfoy, for example, avoids imprisonment after the First War by claiming he acted under control. This claim is accepted, allowing him to return to his position without facing the same treatment as others. This suggests that punishment is not only about what has been done, but about how it is interpreted. Within Hogwarts, punishment takes a different form, but still reflects inconsistency. Detentions vary widely depending on the teacher assigning them. Some are simple tasks, while others involve situations that carry real risk. Students are exposed to danger under the structure of discipline, blurring the line between correction and consequence. This variation suggests that punishment is influenced by the perspective of the one enforcing it, rather than by a standardized system. There are also moments where punishment is delayed or redirected. Characters who commit serious actions are not always held accountable immediately, if at all. This delay can allow events to unfold further, creating outcomes that extend beyond the original action. It suggests that punishment is not always immediate or proportional, but can be shaped by timing and context. The concept of justice overlaps with punishment, but the two do not always align. Punishment is applied, but it does not always result in a sense of resolution. Innocent individuals suffer, while others avoid consequences, creating a system where outcomes do not always reflect the truth of the situation. This disconnect highlights the limitations of a structure that relies on interpretation and enforcement rather than certainty. What makes this theory unsettling is the possibility that punishment within the wizarding world is not consistently tied to fairness. It is influenced by authority, perception, and circumstance, leading to outcomes that can vary significantly. This creates a system where consequences are not always predictable and where similar actions can lead to very different results. At the same time, punishment remains a central part of maintaining order. It reinforces rules, sets boundaries, and creates expectations for behavior. Without it, the structure of the wizarding world would lose a key element of control. This creates a balance where punishment is necessary, but not always reliable. The interaction between action and consequence becomes uncertain within this framework. Characters must navigate a system where outcomes depend on more than just what they do. They must consider how their actions will be perceived, who is involved, and what context surrounds the situation. Over time, this creates an environment where punishment is understood as part of the world, but not always trusted to reflect fairness. It exists, but it does not always provide clarity or resolution. Instead, it adds another layer of complexity to how actions and outcomes are connected. In the end, punishment within the wizarding world is not simply a response to wrongdoing. It is a process shaped by those who enforce it, influenced by the conditions in which it occurs, and applied in ways that are not always consistent. And once this pattern is recognized, it becomes difficult to assume that consequences will always align with actions in a clear or predictable way. There is a pattern in the way truth is presented within the wizarding world that often appears stable, but becomes more uncertain the more closely it is examined. Truth is usually treated as something that can be discovered, confirmed, and understood through evidence or testimony. But when you follow how information is revealed, interpreted, and accepted, it begins to feel less like a fixed reality and more like something shaped by perspective and timing. The existence of veritaserum suggests that truth can be extracted directly. Under its influence, a person is compelled to answer questions honestly, removing the ability to deceive. This creates the impression that truth can be accessed in a pure form, unaffected by interpretation. But even this method has limits. It reveals what the person believes to be true, not necessarily what is objectively accurate. Memory, perception, and understanding still shape the answers that are given. The Pensiev reflects a similar limitation. It allows memories to be viewed with clarity, offering a detailed representation of past events. Yet these memories are still rooted in individual experience. They show what was perceived, not necessarily everything that occurred. This creates a version of truth that feels complete, even when it may not include every perspective. At the same time, the wizarding world relies heavily on testimony. Characters share their experiences, and these accounts are used to build an understanding of events. But testimony is influenced by emotion, by bias, and by the conditions under which it is given. This means that truth is often constructed from multiple perspectives, each of which may differ slightly from the others. The Ministry of Magic demonstrates how truth can be shaped on a larger scale. During periods of uncertainty, information is presented in ways that support a particular narrative. The denial of Voldemort's return is not simply a mistake. It is a controlled version of truth, one that maintains stability by limiting what is acknowledged. This suggests that truth, in practice, is not only about accuracy, but about how it is communicated and received. There are also moments where truth is hidden or delayed. Information is withheld, either to protect individuals or to guide outcomes. This creates situations where characters act without full understanding, making decisions based on incomplete knowledge. When the truth is eventually revealed, it often changes how those actions are understood, showing that timing plays a crucial role in how truth is experienced. Prophecy introduces another layer to this idea. It presents statements about the future that are interpreted in different ways, depending on who hears them. The meaning of a prophecy is not always clear at first, and its significance often becomes apparent only after events have unfolded. This suggests that truth can exist in forms that are not immediately understood, requiring interpretation over time. What makes this theory unsettling is the possibility that truth within the wizarding world is not as fixed as it is often believed to be. It can be influenced by perception, shaped by communication, and altered by the conditions under which it is revealed. This creates a system where understanding is always partial, dependent on what is known and how it is interpreted. At the same time, truth still exists as something that can be approached. Characters seek it, uncover it, and use it to guide their actions, but the path toward it is not always direct. It involves navigating layers of perspective, distinguishing between what is presented and what is underlying. The interaction between truth and belief becomes central to this process. What is accepted as true often depends on how it is framed and who presents it. This creates a dynamic where truth is not only discovered, but also constructed through interpretation. Over time, this pattern shapes how the wizarding world understands itself. Events are recorded, remembered, and retold, each time influenced by the perspective of those involved. This creates a history that reflects both what happened and how it was understood. In the end, truth within the wizarding world is not a single, unchanging point. It is something that emerges through layers of experience, shaped by perception and revealed over time. And once this is recognized, it becomes clear that understanding is not only about finding truth, but about interpreting it within the context in which it appears. There is a pattern in the way choice is understood within the wizarding world that often appears central to everything, yet becomes more uncertain the more closely it is examined. Characters are frequently told that their choices define them, that what they decide matters more than what they are born into. This idea suggests a strong sense of control, where individuals shape their own path through the decisions they make. But when you follow how those choices actually unfold, it begins to feel as though they exist within boundaries that are not always visible. The presence of prophecy introduces this uncertainty early on. It describes a future conflict, naming conditions that must be met, yet it does not dictate every step along the way. This creates the impression that, while certain outcomes may be inevitable, the path toward them is shaped by choice. However, the knowledge of the prophecy itself influences those choices, guiding actions in ways that bring the predicted events closer to reality. This interaction suggests that choice may not exist in isolation. It is influenced by information, by expectation, and by the structures that surround it. When a character believes that a particular outcome is possible or necessary, their decisions begin to align with that belief. This creates a feedback loop, where choice and prediction reinforce each other. At the same time, characters are often placed in situations where options are limited. Circumstances narrow the range of possible actions, shaping decisions before they are even made. Harry's journey, for example, is influenced by factors that he does not control, including the connection to Voldemort and the expectations placed upon him. His choices are real, but they occur within a framework that directs them towards certain outcomes. There are also moments where choice appears to resist expectation. Characters act in ways that are not predicted, creating outcomes that differ from what might have been assumed. These moments suggest that while choice is influenced, it is not entirely controlled. There remains an element of unpredictability, where decisions can alter the direction of events. The concept of the sorting hat reflects this balance. It considers traits, but it also listens to preference, allowing the student to influence the outcome. This suggests that identity and choice are connected, with decisions playing a role in defining who a person becomes. At the same time, The options available are limited to the existing houses, reinforcing the idea that choice operates within a set structure. What makes this theory unsettling is the possibility that choice within the wizarding world is not as free as it is often believed to be. It exists, but it is shaped by forces that are not always visible, including prophecy, expectation, and circumstance. This creates a situation where decisions feel personal, even when they are influenced by factors beyond the individual. At the same time, choice retains its importance. It continues to define actions, relationships, and outcomes even within these boundaries. Characters are still responsible for what they decide, even if the context of those decisions is shaped by external forces. The interaction between freedom and limitation becomes central to this idea. Choice is not removed, but it is guided, influenced, and sometimes constrained. This creates a balance where individuals have agency, but not complete control over the conditions in which that agency is exercised. Over time, this pattern shapes how the wizarding world unfolds. Events are driven by decisions, but those decisions are connected to larger structures that influence their direction. This creates a narrative where choice is both powerful and uncertain, capable of shaping outcomes while still operating within a broader framework. In the end, choice within the wizarding world exists as something that is both real and influenced. It defines who characters become, but it is also shaped by the world around them. And once this is recognized, the idea of complete freedom becomes less certain, replaced by a more complex understanding of how decisions are made and what they truly mean. There is a pattern in the way fate is understood within the wizarding world that often overlaps with the idea of choice, yet remains distinct in ways that are not immediately clear. Fate is suggested through prophecy, through recurring events, and through outcomes that seem to follow a certain direction regardless of how they are approached. It is not always described directly, but it is present in the structure of the story, shaping how events connect over time. Prophecy is the most direct expression of this idea. It identifies conditions, names, individuals, and outlines a conflict that must occur. Yet it does not explain how or when these events will unfold. This creates a sense of inevitability without defining the path that leads to it. The prophecy concerning Harry and Voldemort establishes that one must defeat the other, but it does not determine the exact sequence of actions that will bring this about. This suggests that fate may exist as a framework rather than a fixed script. It sets boundaries, defining what must happen in a general sense while leaving the details open to variation. Within this framework, individuals still make choices, but those choices tend to move towards certain outcomes. Even when alternative paths seem possible, the interaction between Harry and Voldemort reflects this pattern. Their connection is established early, creating a link that influences both of them over time. This connection shapes their actions, drawing them into conflict regardless of how they might try to avoid it. It suggests that certain relationships within the wizarding world carry a kind of momentum, guiding events toward a particular resolution. At the same time, there are moments where fate appears to be influenced by action. The prophecy does not become significant until it is acted upon. Voldemort's decision to target Harry is what sets the events in motion, turning a possibility into a reality. This indicates that fate is not entirely independent. It requires participation, becoming active only when individuals respond to it. There are also instances where outcomes seem unlikely, yet still occur. Characters find themselves in positions that align with larger patterns, even when their individual choices might suggest a different direction. These moments create the impression that events are being drawn toward a particular conclusion, shaped by forces that are not fully visible. What makes this theory unsettling is the possibility that fate within the wizarding world operates quietly beneath the surface, influencing how events unfold without fully determining them. It allows for variation, but it maintains a direction, creating a balance between inevitability and uncertainty. At the same time, fate does not remove responsibility. characters are still accountable for their actions, even if those actions contribute to a larger pattern. This creates a situation where individuals participate in outcomes that may feel predetermined, while still making decisions that define their role within those outcomes. The presence of repeated patterns reinforces this idea. Certain themes, events, and conflicts appear in different forms, suggesting that the wizarding world moves through cycles that are not entirely random. These cycles create a sense of continuity, where past events echo into the present. Over time, this interaction between fate and action shapes how the story develops. Outcomes feel connected, not just by cause and effect, but by an underlying structure that guides how those causes and effects align. This creates a narrative where events are both influenced and directed, existing within a system that is not fully understood. In the end, fate within the wizarding world exists as something that defines possibility rather than certainty. It outlines what can happen, but not exactly how it will happen. It allows for choice, but it also creates a path that those choices tend to follow. And once this balance is recognized, the distinction between what is chosen and what is inevitable becomes more difficult to separate. There is a pattern in the way power is understood within the wizarding world that often appears tied to ability, yet becomes more complex the more closely it is examined. Power is usually associated with skill, knowledge, and strength in magic. Those who can cast more advanced spells or control more difficult forms of magic are seen as more powerful. But when you follow how power actually functions over time, it begins to feel less like a fixed measure and more like something shaped by context, perception, and connection. The Elder Wand represents one of the clearest examples of this complexity. It is described as the most powerful wand in existence, yet its effectiveness depends not only on its inherent qualities, but on its allegiance. Ownership can change through defeat, even without direct possession. This means that power is not contained entirely within the object itself. It is influenced by relationships, by recognition, and by the actions that define who is considered its master. This idea extends beyond objects. Characters who are considered powerful do not always rely solely on their magical ability. Influence, knowledge, and timing all play a role in how power is exercised. Dumbledore's strength is not only in his skill, but in his understanding of people and events. Voldemort's power is not just in his spells, but in the fear he creates and the control he maintains over others. At the same time, there are moments where power shifts unexpectedly. Individuals who are not traditionally seen as powerful are able to influence outcomes in significant ways. This suggests that power is not always concentrated in a single place. It can emerge in different forms, depending on the situation and the individuals involved. There is also a connection between power and belief. The perception of power can affect how it is experienced. When a wizard is believed to be powerful, others respond accordingly, reinforcing that perception. This creates a feedback loop where belief and behavior strengthen each other, making power both a reality and a reflection of how it is viewed. The use of magic itself reflects this variability. Certain spells require not only technical ability, but intent and emotional alignment. This means that power is not just about what a wizard knows, but about how they engage with what they are doing. Two individuals may perform the same spell with different results, depending on how they approach it. What makes this theory unsettling is the possibility that power within the wizarding world is not as stable as it appears. It can shift, change, and be influenced by factors that are not always visible. It is not contained within individuals or objects alone, but exists within the relationships and conditions that surround them. At the same time, power is still recognized and sought after. It shapes goals, drives conflict, and defines roles within the world. Characters pursue it, protect it, and sometimes fear it, suggesting that even in its complexity, it remains a central element of how the wizarding world operates. The interaction between power and context becomes central to this idea. Power is not simply something that is possessed. It is something that is expressed, influenced by the situation in which it is used. This creates a dynamic where power can appear stronger or weaker, depending on the conditions. Over time, this pattern creates a world where power is both present and uncertain. It can be measured in some ways, but not entirely defined. It exists within individuals, but also beyond them, shaped by connections and perception. In the end, power within the wizarding world is not a fixed state. It is something that moves, adapts, and responds to the environment in which it exists. And once this is recognized, it becomes clear that strength is not only about what is held, but about how it is understood and applied. There is a pattern in the way memory is treated within the wizarding world that often appears straightforward, yet becomes increasingly complex the more closely it is examined. Memories are not only recollections of past events, but objects that can be stored, altered, and revisited. This creates a situation where the past is not entirely fixed. It can be preserved, examined from different perspectives, and in some cases, changed. The pensieve provides a clear example of how memory functions beyond simple recall. It allows memories to be viewed as if they exist independently, separate from the person who experienced them. This suggests that memories have a form that can be accessed and shared, existing outside of individual perception. At the same time, the accuracy of these memories is not always certain. They reflect what was seen and understood at the time, which may not include every detail. There are also instances where memory is intentionally altered. Spells can remove, modify, or suppress memories, changing how individuals understand their own past. This creates a gap between what actually happened and what is remembered. Over time, this gap can influence behavior, relationships, and identity, shaping how characters interact with the world. The use of memory as evidence further complicates this idea. Memories are sometimes treated as reliable sources of information, used to confirm events or reveal hidden truths. However, if memories can be altered or incomplete, their reliability becomes uncertain. This raises the possibility that what is accepted as truth may be influenced by how memories are presented and interpreted. There is also a connection between memory and identity. Characters are shaped by their experiences, and their understanding of those experiences depends on what they remember. When memories are changed or removed, it affects how individuals see themselves. This suggests that identity within the wizarding world is closely tied to memory, making it something that can be influenced indirectly through alteration. At the same time, some memories remain resistant to change. Strong emotional experiences appear to leave a more lasting impression, even when other details fade. This creates a distinction between different types of memory, where some are more stable than others. It suggests that while memory can be manipulated, it is not entirely without structure. What makes this theory unsettling is the possibility that the past within the wizarding world is not as stable as it appears. It can be revisited and altered, creating multiple layers of understanding that may not always align. This introduces uncertainty into how events are remembered and how they influence the present. There are also moments where memory is used to control or protect. Removing a memory can prevent harm, but it can also limit understanding. Altering a memory can change how someone perceives a situation, influencing their actions without their awareness. This creates a situation where memory becomes a tool, capable of shaping reality indirectly. The interaction between memory and time further reinforces this complexity. Memories allow characters to engage with past events in a way that feels immediate, bringing them into the present. This blurs the distinction between what has happened and what is being experienced, creating a continuous connection between different points in time. Over time, this pattern creates a world where memory is both a record and a variable. It preserves events, but it also allows them to be reinterpreted and, in some cases, reshaped. This creates a layered understanding of the past, where certainty is not always guaranteed. In the end, memory within the wizarding world exists as something that holds both truth and uncertainty. It connects individuals to their past, but it can also be influenced in ways that change how that past is understood. And once this is recognized, it becomes clear that remembering is not always the same as knowing. There is a pattern in the way identity is formed within the wizarding world that often appears consistent, yet becomes less certain the more closely it is examined. Identity is usually understood as something that develops over time, shaped by experience, choice, and environment. Characters grow, change, and define themselves through their actions. But when you follow how identity is influenced by magic, memory, and expectation, it begins to feel less stable than it first appears. Names play an important role in this process. They are used to define individuals, to recognize them, and in some cases, to give power over them. The reluctance to speak certain names reflects an understanding that identity is not just descriptive, but active. It can influence how individuals are perceived and how they interact with others. This suggests that identity is partly shaped by how it is acknowledged. There is also a connection between identity and transformation. Magic allows individuals to alter their appearance, their voice, and even their physical form. Polyjuice potion, for example, enables a person to take on another's identity for a limited time. This raises the question of where identity truly resides. If appearance and voice can be changed, then identity must exist beyond physical form, yet it is still influenced by how that form is presented. The presence of Horcruxes further complicates this idea. By dividing the soul, identity becomes fragmented, existing in multiple places at once. This suggests that identity is not entirely unified, but can be separated and preserved in parts. Each fragment retains a connection to the original individual, creating multiple representations of the same identity. At the same time, there are moments where identity appears to remain consistent despite change. Characters who undergo significant experiences still retain a sense of who they are. This suggests that while identity can be influenced, it is not entirely erased. There is a continuity that persists, even when circumstances alter how it is expressed. Expectation also plays a role in shaping identity. Individuals are often defined by how others see them, and these perceptions can influence behavior. When someone is consistently treated in a certain way, it can shape how they understand themselves. This creates a feedback loop where identity is reinforced by external perception. What makes this theory unsettling is the possibility that identity within the wizarding world is not as fixed as it is often believed to be. It can be altered, divided, and influenced by factors that extend beyond the individual. This creates a situation where the boundary between who someone is and how they are perceived becomes less distinct. There are also moments where identity is hidden or obscured. Characters conceal aspects of themselves, either by choice or by circumstance. This suggests that identity can exist in layers, with different parts revealed at different times. It is not always fully visible, even to those who possess it. The interaction between identity and memory further deepens this complexity. As memories change, so does the understanding of self. This creates a situation where identity evolves not only through new experiences, but through the reinterpretation of past ones. It becomes something that is continuously shaped rather than permanently defined. Over time, this pattern creates a world where identity is both present and uncertain. It exists, but it is influenced by forces that can change how it is understood and expressed. This creates a balance between stability and variation, where individuals remain themselves while also being shaped by the conditions around them. In the end, identity within the wizarding world is not a fixed point, but a process. It is formed, altered, and redefined over time, influenced by memory, perception, and transformation. And once this is recognized, it becomes clear that knowing who someone is may not be as simple as it first seems. There is a pattern in the way endings are understood within the wizarding world that often appears final, yet becomes less certain the more closely it is examined. Events reach conclusions, conflicts are resolved, and characters move forward. But when you look at how these endings are structured, they rarely exist as complete closures. Instead, they seem to lead into new beginnings, continuing the same underlying patterns in different forms. The defeat of Voldemort is often seen as a definitive end. It marks the conclusion of a long conflict, bringing a sense of resolution to the events that shaped the wizarding world for many years. Yet even this moment does not erase what came before. The structures, beliefs, and divisions that allowed that conflict to exist remain present, suggesting that the conditions for similar events could emerge again. There is also a pattern in how knowledge is carried forward. What is learned from past events does not always lead to lasting change. Some lessons are remembered, while others fade over time. This creates a cycle where similar situations can develop again, shaped by the same underlying factors. The wizarding world moves forward, but it does not always move away from what it has already experienced. At the same time, individuals continue to shape how these endings are understood. Their interpretations influence how events are remembered and how they affect the future. This suggests that endings are not fixed points, but perspectives that can change depending on how they are viewed. There are also moments where endings feel incomplete. Certain questions remain unanswered, and some outcomes are left open. This creates a sense that not everything has been fully resolved, even when the main conflict has ended. It suggests that closure within the wizarding world is often partial rather than absolute. What makes this theory unsettling is the possibility that endings within the wizarding world are not true conclusions, but transitions. They mark a change in state rather than a final resolution, allowing patterns to continue in new forms. This creates a sense of continuity, where the past remains connected to the present. The interaction between endings and beginnings becomes central to this idea. Each conclusion creates the conditions for what follows, shaping how future events will unfold. This creates a continuous flow, where events are linked rather than isolated. There is also a connection between endings and memory. How events are remembered influences how they are understood, which in turn affects how similar situations are approached in the future. This means that endings are not only about what happens, but about how those events are interpreted over time. Over time, this pattern creates a world where nothing is entirely separate from what came before. Endings lead into beginnings, and beginnings carry elements of previous endings. This creates a cycle that continues, shaped by the same underlying forces. In the end, endings within the wizarding world exist as moments of change rather than finality. They close one phase while opening another, maintaining the continuity of the world rather than breaking it. And once this is recognized, it becomes clear that what appears to be the end may simply be another point in an ongoing pattern that never fully stops. When you begin to place these ideas next to each other, a quieter picture of the wizarding world starts to form, not one built on clear answers, but on patterns that repeat, shift, and continue beneath the surface. What once felt like isolated moments begin to connect, and the spaces between them feel less empty than they first appeared. Some explanations remain uncertain, but they no longer feel accidental. These theories do not replace the story. They sit beside it, offering another way to understand what was already there. Small details become more deliberate, and familiar events take on a different weight when viewed from a distance. Nothing changes on the surface, yet the meaning behind it can feel slightly altered, and as everything settles, the questions do not disappear. They remain, quieter than before, but still present, waiting to be noticed again. Because sometimes the most unsettling ideas are not the ones that contradict the story, but the ones that seem to fit too easily, as if they were always there, just slightly out of focus.